Well, it's springtime. I know this because on my TV screen is Augusta National, a spectacularly pretty place to view on your TV. Although Tiger Woods struggling, he's not going to get a six-screen jacket this year. But I do enjoy watching the beauty of the golf course and the great sounds and the wonderful music. If you're doing nothing, maybe studying today, you want something pretty in the background, put on the golf today. It's a very pretty place to look at. All right, welcome back, everybody. It is the KingCast, of course. One of our last three shows for the season. Great job, everybody. Great content we created this season for sure. Good morning, Nicole. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you again. Lily, welcome back.
Thank you.
Nice to see you as well. Jack, you got sports today? Why don't you unmute yourself, my man? Keep yourself unmuted, okay?
All right.
Jack, good to see you today. How are things?
It was good.
Good. You're taking a job for Hill today. He covered you last week. You got him covered this week. I like the teamwork. As always, we have a wonderful KingCast for you today. I'm excited to announce our guest today, a friend of the show, Dean Maki, father to alum Ari Maki. Dean is the chief economist at Point72 Asset Management right here in Stanford. Dean will give us some good insights on the condition of the economy in a few minutes. Lily, you found a hot number this week that got the attention of a lot of people. The initial unemployment claims for the week ending, what was that? I think the 9th.
I think I have it as the second.
The second. Okay, right. That's right. The Saturday. Good. We're on the 10th, so that should be right. Thank you for correcting that. I taught you well on your data. Anyway, historic number, a low since 1968. Tell us about initial unemployment claims.
New applications for U.S. unemployment benefits fell last week to a near 54-year low as employers held on to workers in the tight labor market. On Thursday, the Labor Department said that initial jobless claims, a figure for layoffs, fell to 166,000 during the week that ended on April 2nd, compared with a revised 171,000 the prior week. The weekly total was the lowest since November 1968, when the labor force was less than half of its current size. Initial filing for unemployment dropped to 166,000, well below the Dow Jones estimate of 200,000 and 5,000 under the previous week's total, which was revised sharply lower. The department noted that it revised claims from 2017 to 2021 and changed the seasonal factors it is using to calculate the numbers. In times of relative economic stability, the multiplicative option is generally preferred over the additive option, the Labor Department said Thursday. However, in the presence of a large level shift in a time series, multiplicative seasonal adjustment factors can result in a systematic over or under adjustment of the series. In such cases, additive seasonal adjustment factors are preferred since they tend to track seasonal fluctuations more accurately in this series and have small revisions. Jobless claims have hovered around half-century lows since late 2021, as the labor market has continued during economic recovery. Given how tight the labor market is, firms are likely being extremely cautious about laying anyone off permanently, said Stephen Stanley, chief economist at Amherst Pierpont. Continuing claims, a figure for the total number of people receiving payments from the state unemployment programs, moved slightly up to 1,523,000 for the week ending March 26th from the previous week's revised total. The numbers nevertheless reflect a jobs market that is subject to a severe worker shortage. There are about 5 million more employment openings than there are available workers, a situation that has driven up wages and contributed to spiraling inflation. Federal Reserve officials are raising interest rates to try to constrict outsized demand comes amid ongoing struggles in the supply chain. Claims remain so low that at times such turmoil suggests that now the economy is holding up in soaring crude oil, gasoline, and other prices. Mark Hamrick, senior economic analyst at Bankrate, said. How long this can persist remains to be seen. Due to the fact that COVID is calming down and people are starting to go out more, the demand for workers has risen significantly. The bar for layoffs is very high and will remain that way due to the severity and tightness of the market.
Lily, you know, if we were in class together, I'd be asking for a song of Happy Days or God Bless America when we had a number like this, right? 166, great number. So good news for sure. What have policymakers said about the increased demand for labor?
Minutes of the Federal Reserve's March 15th/16th meeting published on Wednesday showed policymakers observed that demand for labor continued to substantially exceed available supply across many parts of the economy, and that various indicators pointed to a very tight labor market.
All right, that's a really good news for us, right? Great sign about the labor market. I'm sure the Democrats are happy about this. Remember, their focus is on November, and the better the economy is, the better the chances are of maintaining their places in Congress. So important news for us. And we're going to ask Mr. Mackey about this difficult labor market we're confronted with in terms of this unusual situation. Remember now, we are still not recovered all the non-farm jobs that we had in January 2020. We're still about 2 million below that spot. So that'll be important for us. All right, now it's time for the show where we introduce our guest. Our guest this week is a friend of the show. I think this is her third appearance on the KingCast, 2 video and 1 audio. Our guest is Dean Maki, Chief Economist at Point 72 Asset Management right here in Stamford. Dean, good morning.
Good morning, Frank.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
I've identified you as a friend of the show. I think this is your third appearance with us at the KingCast over the past 4 years. So we really appreciate it, taking the time on the weekend to talk to us about these important topics. It's great to see you as always. Hey, Dean, before we get started, is Ari finishing up this year?
No, he's a junior this year.
He's a junior, okay. Always want to remember that you're the dad of one of our alums, Ari Maki, one of our great students in the economics classroom.
Yeah.
Dean, I want to start us off. We had a really strong labor market report for March. Low unemployment, more job openings than unemployed. But total non-farm employment is still a couple million jobs below the levels of January 2020. What can you share with us as a true state of the U.S. labor market today?
Well, the U.S. labor market is extraordinarily tight right now. And that's despite the fact that we still don't have as much as COVID. And I think this has been one of the mysteries that people have been trying to solve. I think the bottom line that's happened is that we had early retirements and second earners have come back to the workforce. And so what that means is those people may not come back, or at least they may not come back soon. And because of that, the unemployment rate is dropping extraordinarily rapidly. It's falling 0.2 a month right now. And we're at 3.6%. And so we think by the end of this year, we're going to have a 2 handle on the unemployment rate.
Wow.
Something we haven't seen since 1953 in the US. So it's a very tight labor market, and wage growth is picking up. It's going to pick up further. And so it's certainly a good time for workers.
Jack?
Mr. Mackey, there is a great deal of talk about continuing high rates of food inflation, and even shortages of diesel fuel and fertilizer prices remain elevated since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What is your outlook for food prices over the next 6 months? And are you expecting shortages in the US?
Yeah, so far food inflation has been about in line with overall inflation for the US. By the PC price index, which is the Fed's favored measure, food inflation right now is running about 6% year on year, which is right around what overall inflation is running. But we do think that overall inflation, or overall food inflation, I should say, is going to be picking up significantly over the coming months. As you mentioned, the war in Ukraine is going to affect things like, already has affected things like wheat prices, and there is going to be a significant rise in global food prices. We probably won't have shortages in the US because we have such a diverse food supply, but there are countries that may well have shortages going forward.
Mr. Mackey.
Hold on a second, Nicole, if you don't mind. Let me just jump. Dean, is that a concern for you in terms of stability, potential food shortages?
I think it is a concern. We already have seen protests and rioting in certain emerging market countries over food prices. So I do think that could get worse in coming months.
Nicole, I apologize. Go right ahead.
Mr. Mackey, the FOMC minutes from the Fed's March meeting were more hawkish than expected and focused on high rates of inflation. Yet recently, we witnessed the yield curve invert from 2s to 10s, which has often been a precursor to recession. So do you think the Fed will have to change their monetary policy plans?
I think the Fed will not change their plans soon. So it looks like they're going to do 50 basis points at the next couple meetings, at each meeting. And they likely will be raising rates to something like 2.5% by the end of this year. So the US economy has a lot of momentum right now. So I don't think that the Fed, that rate hike path is going to derail things this year. So 2 things are going to determine how far the Fed has to go. One is how financial markets react to the Fed tightening. Because if the stock market, for example, were to fall sharply in response to Fed tightening, the Fed might have to do a little bit less because overall financial conditions would have been tightening in that case. The second thing, and this is really the key issue going forward, is how much of the inflation we have right now will turn out to be temporary and supply chain related, things that will resolve as supply chains get better over time, and how much is already driven by high wage inflation. Our view is that likely a good portion of that inflation will ease over time. And so we do expect overall inflation to be moving lower this year. If that's the case, the Fed won't necessarily have to induce a recession soon to bring inflation down. On the other hand, if it is already primarily wage-driven inflation, then I don't see how the Fed would avoid causing a recession to get inflation back to 2%.
Well, let me interject just for a second. Dean, what do we think the lags are on monetary policy right now? Are they 6 to 12 months still, or has that changed at all?
Yeah, somewhere 6 to 18 months. The full impact phases in over that time. It's tricky because things like mortgage rates have already moved up because the market's foreseeing the Fed tightening and long rates have moved up. So that impact will be relatively short term. It'll hit housing relatively quickly, but the full impact on employment, et cetera, takes quite a bit of time.
Lily, go right ahead.
Mr. Mackey, President Biden's global coordination of strategic petroleum reserves to fight high oil prices seem to have helped move West Texas Intermediate crude back below $100. What is your outlook for oil prices for the balance of the year?
Yeah, so I'm not an oil price expert, but I have to make an assumption for our inflation forecast. We would expect that oil prices will stay high, but our base case would not be that they go up to $175 or $200 per barrel. There are circumstances under which that could happen, but we foresee oil staying relatively high around where it is, and perhaps even declining somewhat move through the year. A lot of this depends on what growth in Europe does in response to the war in Ukraine. And Europe does look like it's likely to slow. Also, China is dealing with their zero COVID policy right now and having a lot of shutdowns. If China and Europe both slow down significantly, then oil prices will come down. So there's a lot of factors at play, as you can tell. But our base case is oil stays high, but that does not move up a lot from here.
Dean, we'll get you out of here on this one. Is Fed Chair Powell confronting a similar choice as Fed Chair Paul Volcker confronted in the 80-82 period, more inflation or recession?
I think this goes back to this issue of whether how much of the inflation is going to prove to be temporary and how much is underlying wage-driven inflation. And this is really, he'll either be lucky or not on this in a sense. If it turns out that as global supply chains improve, as we get past COVID, as things open up and the demand for goods is not so extreme and people do shift into services consumption, goods prices, things like used cars, new cars, they will come down or at least not be going up at the same pace. And if that's the dominant theme, that inflation moderates as we move forward, then I don't think he'll have to go all the way into driving the economy into recession. On the other hand, if this is very sticky and proves that inflation a year from now is still sitting at 6% on the PCE price index, then I do think they will have to cause a recession to bring inflation down.
Okay, so lots out there still to develop for us. Dean, I want to thank you so much for joining us, sharing your outstanding insights with the students and the faculty here at King. We wish you a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the Masters, and we hope to see you again soon.
All right. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks. Okay, a great interview as always with Dean Maki, really, really outstanding economist. One of the great, most well-known economists from the Federal Reserve System. Won the award for best forecasting a couple times in the past. Really nice of him to take his time to talk with us here at King School. That's a guy who's in high demand in lots of places for his insight and opinion. All right, great job, team, as always, with managing our guests. And now we're going to transition to another hot topic for Nicole. Nicole, you're taking a look at the dollar's reserve status, if I'm not mistaken, yes, and currencies, and the role of the dollar in the world and in cryptocurrencies. Tell us what's going on with the dollar's reserve status in the world.
Thanks, Mr. Roche. So today I'm going to talk about the role of the US dollar in the global economy. Since 1971, the dollar has become the de facto currency for cross-border transactions. Of course, 1971 is the year that President Nixon announced the end of the Bretton Woods system that provided for the dollar's convertibility to gold. So currencies around the world were no longer fixed to gold, but instead the prices floated between different currencies. Being the reserve currency of the world provides numerous advantages to the US. First of all, the demand for US dollars as a reserve currency enables the US to borrow cheaper than any other country. The dollars held outside the US also amounts to an interest-free loan to the US. US companies also face lower exchange rate risks on international transactions since prices are quoted in US dollars. And international debt that is denominated in US dollars makes Fed policy more impactful. The dollar has also always been seen as a safe haven during times of volatility in the global economy. When things are uncertain in terms of economics or geopolitics, people want to hold US dollars. People want safety, liquidity, and acceptability, and the US dollar checks all of these boxes. We are seeing this phenomenon play out again with the war in Ukraine. Since the start of the Russian invasion into Ukraine, the US dollar currency index is up about 4%. But for years, people have been speculating about the demise of the dollar as the primary currency for global trade. The rise and fall of the dollar is not as simple as whether there are problems in the global community. The value of the dollar depends on the monetary policy of the US versus other countries, trade balances, inflation rates, among other factors. And there remain long-term challenges for the supremacy of the dollar. First off, the US dollar share of foreign exchange reserves continues to fall from over 70% in 2000 to under 60% today. For years, China has been advocating for the yuan to replace the dollar as the world's currency to give it more control over its economy, but the yuan share is still only 2.5% of foreign exchange reserves. The euro is 21% of international reserves and has fluctuated around this level since 2000. With the sanctions on Russia, the ruble has plummeted. To provide support for the currency, Putin required unfriendly countries to buy Russian gas using rubles instead of dollars. Every time a country moves away from the dollar for international transactions, it chips away at the dollar being the implied world currency. US monetary policy is also a big threat to the role of the dollar in the world economy. With the unprecedented dovish monetary policy that started during the credit crisis and reached unfathomable levels during the pandemic, the US is thought to be debasing the dollar, and the world's confidence in the US dollar may certainly be called into question. Now, let's shift over to cryptocurrency for just a moment. Cryptocurrency has a number of advantages that any currency tied to and controlled by a particular country does not have. The sanctions against Russia have highlighted the importance of cryptocurrency, which is not tied to any country. Russians who own cryptocurrency can maintain their buying power as the price of crypto is not tied to Russia or its economy, whereas rubles are essentially worthless outside of Russia unless you're buying oil or gas from Russia. In some ways, cryptocurrency is really the currency of the world. Crypto won't replace the dollar anytime soon, but with the increasing geopolitical splintering between countries, combined with the extreme monetary policy that has been utilized in the US since the credit crisis, we may be nearing the beginning of the end for King Dollar.
Yes, I like that phrase, King Dollar, of course. A great topics to both of you chose again today. Nicole, rarely do you hear this conversation about dollars reserve status, so very nicely done in terms of picking a good topic there. It's really serious. I mean, we have, you mentioned the benefits we accrue. I, for one, I'm okay if we lose reserve status, because there are also costs to that as well. We can weigh the cost benefits. One of the costs is that by definition, if you're reserve currency status, you must run a trade deficit in terms of capital flows. Capital flows out, and that trade-off is by goods flowing in. And so that's one way, if dollar reserve status was limited, we could reduce our trade deficit. But a really interesting topic, and I thought about a lot. So very well done there. All right, Lily and Cole, great job on economics. Let's switch gears a little bit, talk about what's going on in the classroom. It's time for
What did we learn this week?
All right, Lily, start us off. What'd you do? What'd you learn this week? Something fun? Or not?
So this week in Mr. This week in Mr. Learnicum's AP Congo class, we learned about what a kleptocracy was and how Russia can be classified as one because of how Putin runs the country.
And can we define a kleptocracy? Does that mean stealing? Does that mean corruption?
Yeah, it's kind of like when the corrupt leaders use their political power to like gain all the wealth and like just put anyone down and just gain power at others' expense.
Yeah, I read an interesting article this morning about concerns over Russia's nuclear arsenal, given what we're finding about their conventional army. the people responsible for maintaining the safety and readiness of their nuclear arsenal also kleptocracy, also take the money and not do what was supposed to be done. So interesting insights into that for sure. Okay, Jack, what'd you learn this week?
So I learned about poetry terms such as imagery, juxtaposition, enjambment, and slant rhymes. So that was fun.
Is that Mr. Boaz?
No, this is Dr. Gigani.
Dr. Ganti. Okay, yeah, she loves poetry and she has poetry hanging on her door all the time, and she shares poetry via email. Jack, have you tried to write a poem yet? Do you have some skills?
No, none whatsoever.
I've tried to write poetry. I'm really envious of those who write poetry. Lily Nicole, you ever try to write poetry?
Yeah, I wrote a poem actually recently and it won second place in the Stanford Literary Competition.
Oh, that's fantastic. Way to go. Maybe
like poetry.
last two King casts, you'll share that with us.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Nicole, what'd you learn this week?
This week in BC Calculus with Dr. K, we learned how to find the speed, velocity, and acceleration when given a particle's position in terms of parametric equations. And this was particularly cool because last year in AB Calculus, we could only find information about a particle moving left to right, but this year we know so much more calculus and we can incorporate up, down, and vertical motion as well.
Are you talking particles like biology and chemistry?
No, just like, maybe a car, just we call it a particle.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Understood. Okay, it sounds really difficult.
It's
All right,
fun.
that is,
What did we learn this week?
okay, I love that. And I always want to put teachers into the classroom of subjects they don't teach and see how they do against students. I would love to see that competition. All right, thank you very much for that insight into the classroom for us. Let's check in on King things, Lily.
Spirit Week will be on April 25th and conclude on April 29th.
There will be a King Student Athlete Health Services panel on April 27th.
The King Cares Family Service Day Music Fest will be on May 1st.
Okay, so a little quiet in the King things world the past couple of weeks, but we'll pay attention for anything important that's coming around. Of course, what's really important is 3 more Mondays for seniors before their senior projects. And I think we're down to 10 Mondays for summer break. So good news. Everyone's really excited on campus. It's kind of fun to watch. As always, I'll remind you, don't take your foot off the pedal yet, students. Okay, Jack, it's time for sports. Take us away.
So we start off with the devastating news of the death of Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Dwayne Haskins. On Saturday morning, he was fatally struck by a dump truck in South Florida. Haskins was just 24 years old. Haskins was training in South Florida with Steelers quarterbacks and other personnel. Haskins was chosen by the Washington Commanders at the 15th selection in the 2019 NFL Draft after a tremendous collegiate career where he went toe-to-toe with Tua Tagovailoa and Kyler Murray in the legendary 2018 Heisman Trophy race. Players and coaches from around the league, as well as thousands of NFL fans from around the world, have come out to express their condolences. Here at the KingCast, our thoughts and prayers go out to those afflicted by this terrible tragedy. Now on to lighter news, as golf is once again converging around Augusta National for the Masters. The first major championship of the year goes into its final day as Scottie Scheffler leads with a total score of 9 under, who had to fend off cold and windy conditions in a tough round to maintain his lead. His 71 was one of the only 9 scorecards under par for the day. Cameron Smith, after posting a 68, slots into second, 3 strokes behind. Tiger Woods battled back pain to limp to a 78, 6 over on the day. It'll be a tough task for him to muster enough strength to get back on the course for another 18 holes. And finally, baseball is back after months of tension and uncertainty as the Players Association and the owners' negotiations continued on. The league finally got its act together and got the games underway. Both New York teams remain undefeated. The Mets are 3-0, so call the season now. And defending World Series champs, the Atlanta Braves received their long-awaited championship rings. It's been a relatively calm opening to the season so far, and hopefully the league can stay intact to play some baseball.
Okay, not a huge fan of baseball, but happy that's back on. Is it Yankees Red Sox this weekend in Yankee Stadium?
Yep.
Always a classic matchup. And I have no doubt Tiger Woods will be on the course today. In fact, he's going to try and shoot a really low round today, I'm sure, just to show off or try to show he's not done. But I watched him every day this week. The first few holes, he walked nicely. By 6 or 7 or 8, the limp starts coming. By 18, he's really struggling to walk. But good effort by Tiger. All right, thank you, Jack, for sports as always. Let's go ahead and move on today to economy and the markets. And we'll check on data for the week ending April 8th. Nicole, start us off.
On Monday, February factory orders down 0.5% versus up 1.5% in January.
On Tuesday, February international trade balance goods and services a deficit of 89.2 billion, unchanged compared to January. And the March ISM non-manufacturing index 58.3 versus 56.5 in February.
On Wednesday, we had MBA mortgage applications for the week ending April 1st, down 6.3% versus down 6.8% in the prior week.
On Thursday, we had initial unemployment claims for the week ending April 2nd, 166,000 versus 171,000 in the prior week.
Which Lily highlighted for us in our hot topics. And Friday, we had no data. Nicole, what's going on for the week of April 11th this week?
On Monday, no data.
On Tuesday, March consumer price index, watch out for that inflation number, and the March federal budget balance.
On Wednesday, we have MBA mortgage applications for the week ending April 8th in the March producer price index.
On Thursday, we will have initial unemployment claims for the week ending April 9th, March retail sales, and the April University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index.
And on Friday, April Empire State Manufacturing Index, March capacity utilization, and March industrial production.
Don't forget now, you want to trade, you want to invest, you want to evaluate markets, you have to evaluate data. Markets react to data. It's called fundamental analysis. Check on the health of the U.S. economy. We present the 30 top data points every month that impact the economy. There's many, many more. Others choose to follow. We just follow the core 30. All right, let's move on and see how markets reacted for the week ending April 8th. Jack, start us off with equities.
This week was a down week across most of the market in equities. The biggest factor affecting market returns this week were the minutes released from the Fed's March meeting on Wednesday. The release of the highly anticipated report sent the equities market downward. The Fed indicated they would begin to implement a much tighter monetary policy in an attempt to dampen the rampant inflation. The S&P 500 closed down 1.27%. The NASDAQ fell 3.86%, and the Dow dropped 0.28% for back-to-back weekly declines. The tech stocks and in turn the NASDAQ took the biggest hit. This is because investors are beginning to unload their riskier tech stocks in order to prepare for the higher interest rates. Along with tech stocks, microchip makers and manufacturers also took a big hit due to supply chain issues.
Lily, what's happened in the fixed income world with interest rates?
The spike in interest rates throughout this past week was largely caused by the Fed's outlook on inflation and investors reacting to that. After the Fed meeting minutes were released, fixed income traders took rates higher with the US yield curve shifting from 1 month through the 30-year. The yield curve has flattened out from last week when the 2-year and 10-year rates were inverted. The 1 month had a high of 0.24% and a low of 0.16%. It finished off the week at 0.24%. The 10-year Treasury rate had a high of 2.72% and a low of 2.45%. It ended the week off at 2.7%. The US 2-year rate had a high of 2.54% and a low of 2.42%.
And as Mr. Maki indicated, those rates are going higher. He's calling for a 100 basis point hike in the next 2 meetings of the Fed. And so we can see those levels a couple hundred points higher from there. All right, Nicole, what's happening in the FX world, which you covered today in your hot topic?
Yeah, so as I said, King Dollar continues to reign. The US dollar index had another week up as investors continue to seek out higher rates of return and find safe haven for their money. The dollar index opened the week at 98.86 and closed the week at 99.84, just off the high of 100.15, a high not seen since October 2016, and before that, July of 1999. Again, one of the few outliers was the Russian ruble. The dollar ruble rate closed the week at 77.75 rubles to the dollar, off from the high of 84. Someone in Russia or perhaps China is spending a great deal of money supporting the currency, or the Russian central bank authorities are monetary geniuses. In fact, the renewed ruble strength has allowed the Bank of Russia to cut interest rates by 300 basis points from 20% to 17%. Prior to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the bank had rates set at 9.5%.
Got to give them credit over there for whatever they're doing. It's worked out reasonably well for them. The chaos could have been worse. I'll finish it off with a little look in commodities. A very interesting story has developed out of the White House this past week. The United States is now no longer the only country releasing barrels from their strategic petroleum reserve to help lower the price of oil. 30 industrial economies, part of the International Energy Association, the IEA, are coordinating to release some 180 million barrels of oil. The details are still being worked out. This has been very helpful in the attempt to bring down oil prices. WTI crude oil reached a week low of $94.01 off the high of 104.49. Brent oil out of the North Sea reached the week high of 108.66, and the low was 98.79 to close the week. Moving on to gold. Gold has gained renewed attention in the face of continuing high rates of inflation, with the metal rallying from the weekly low of 1,921 to close the week at the high of 1,950, and bumping up against a very important psychological resistance level for the gold market. Remember, crypto and gold, those are your defense apparently these days for inflation. All right, nice rundown in markets. Let's close out the show with our friendly reminders. Lily,
Do your reading.
Do your homework.
Come to class prepared.
use your blinkers when making turns or switching lanes.
Stop signs mean stop.
And no texting while driving.
Okay, that is it for us. Well done. Only 2 more shows to finish our 4th season. Tell your friends and family to listen to the KingCast at kingschoolct.org campus life page. Nice job today, Dan. Nice job.